Good morning, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're just sorry to not be seeing you in person because, of course, we would have been performing Bach's doubles and triples with you this week in Dublin and Kilkenny. It's such a shame, but we are looking forward to seeing you in 2022. I mean, that feels like forever away.
It does. It feels like such a long time, but it won't be, of course. It'll go by in a flash.
Yes.
And yes, I'm really sorry not to be there. And I love Dublin, and I just love all your musicians. So can't wait.
Yeah, it'll be good to see you when we get to it. So we're all in lockdown at the moment, and I'm wondering if there are any particular things that you've been listening to or reading or working on during this time at home.
Definitely. Well, I mean, the biggest change, of course, for us musicians is just to be in one place. I mean, not you know, some musicians aren't even at home, are they? They've been stuck in different places, but the fact to actually be in one place is psychologically, emotionally, physically, is such a different experience, isn't it? And so you go through different phases. At first, it's like, oh, great, I can have, you know, I can have booze all day, or I can got nothing to, you know, I don't have to be sane for anything. Of course you do. But we'll come to that in a minute. Or, you know, you go through funny things. Like, you know, you can lie in, you can stay up late, you can watch movies, all of those things that you, well, I personally can't do most of the time. I mean, I do watch the odd movie, and I do, you know, have the odd glass of something, of course, like all of us. But this sense of freedom that is, on the one hand, very confusing, because you just lose all your footing and can be very depressing. And, you know, I've had bad weeks, like all of us, I'm sure. And then at the same time, you have this opportunity. And so I've been trying to, every now and again, you just kind of go up and down, you have flashes of things. And every now and again, I kind of think, okay, so I could actually be doing this. I could, gosh, that would be really exciting to be getting into this. So when that takes over, then I have flashes of, you know, activity and insight, and I have been listening to well, my CD collection, which I probably haven't listened to for many years, because of course when you're on the go, you know, you've always got your whatever else going on and preparing for things. And so I tend to not listen to much other music, especially not classical music. So I tend to listen to, well, jazz or easy stuff, or completely different repertoire to what what I'm working on. So symphonic repertoire or contemporary, or, you know, things like that. And so actually to have the freedom and just the leisure time, I might say. I mean, it was really like a kind of given sabbatical, wasn't it, these months? Yeah. To actually, yeah, and to use the time to do different things. So going through my CD collection has been amazing, and a bit of a kind of trip down memory lane, you know, kind of listening to things that I had when I was at the Guildhall and I was studying, and thinking, oh yeah, I used to listen to this late at night, and, you know, like Ravel and Debussy and just odd things and jazz, and so that's been really wonderful. Yeah. And also getting to know my bookshelf. I mean, literally thinking, just looking at it, sitting on the sofa, kind of just pondering, or, you know, just doing nothing, which is also, that's a new thing, isn't it? Doing nothing. Mm-hmm. That's quite hard to do, actually, doing nothing.
There's an art to it, yeah.
Definitely. I don't know how, whether, you know, how you feel about that, but I've had to learn how to do that. To do nothing, just to be. And I've had help kind of reading a lot of, well, actually, of course, there's masses of stuff online and constant things that ping up on your phone and on the computer that's interesting. And then you read one sentence, it takes you somewhere else. And so you're suddenly in a huge kind of world that, you know, you've gone off on a tangent. And that's quite fun to lose yourself in that. Suddenly 2 hours have gone and you think, no wonder my coffee's cold. But I have found a lot of solace in the wisdom of the Stoics, so the old Stoics. So I've actually been reading a really lovely book. I've got it here if you'd like to see, which is really just it's called the Stoic Challenge. philosophers. It's all it's basically a guide to becoming, listen, get this, guide to becoming tougher, calmer, and more resilient. Don't we all need that? So here, a blatant advert for this book. It's written by William Irvin, or I don't even know how you say it. It's an American writer. And he basically just describes how, through his own experience, how he has learnt to turn a difficult situation into an opportunity. It's all of that kind of thinking, which of course is rather relevant during these times. And I mean, I'm extremely lucky. I'm healthy, touch wood, where's some wood? That'll remain the case. I'm pretty affluent. I mean, I'm not rich, but I've got enough, you know, I can go shopping twice a week. I've got enough money to do that. Okay, we've been given a mortgage holiday, which is great, but because of, you know, income not coming in and all of those kind of nitty gritty things that need sorting out. But I have no reason to complain. There's no one in my family who's been ill. Mind you, a few people have had it, but not seriously ill, and no one's died. So I mean, my heart goes out to all those poor people who are suffering, of course. And you know, we're all suffering in different respects, and in a way you can't really quantify suffering because it's such a personal experience, and it's different for everyone, and it's just as valid, I would say. You know, even if you know, a smaller person falls over and hurts himself, that is also a kind of suffering, and that needs to be taken seriously as well, just like someone who's had a life-changing experience of someone passing away. So yeah, I've been really, I'm quite kind of taken by the Stoics.
Yeah,
that's a really good thing. And also I've just been reading more widely, just things that pop up. You just got more headspace, literally, haven't you? Because there's more time. I've been reading a novel by it was recommended by a friend by Amor Towles. So I had these ready so I could show you. So this is about this count in post-Russian Revolution, and it's just really well written. I recommend it. A Gentleman in Moscow, it's called. And just delving into someone else's story, into a completely different time, different country, different culture is fantastic, isn't it? It takes you away. It's a kind of escapism. Of course, it's deeper than, it's a deeper experience than when you watch a movie. You can get that by watching movies, but I don't know, after a while watching movies is fantastic, and you can turn your living room into a cinema and do the popcorn and everything, and the kids love that. But at the same time, it doesn't feed the soul as much as reading a book, I would say. I know it's very old-fashioned, but I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that. So I'm really waffling on. I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. It's great. Thank you. Do you see books as films when you're reading? Because there are a lot of people who read and they see the pictures along with it. Or is it the book that you're in, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, it comes and goes. I mean, if it's something like if it's a novel, then that does happen. You have very, very strong images, you know, and you know, and you know what their eyebrows look like, and what hair they've got, and what they're wearing, and what kind of figure, you know, whether they're tall, short, or big, or small. It definitely, yeah. And also, you know, when scenes are being described, like rooms or countryside, of course you relate to things that you've already seen. You know, you might have seen in a painting, in a picture of that particular time, or you might have had that experience of walking through the countryside. And of course, you know, it's pretty subjective. But no, I have very strong images, and they follow me into my dreams, which is rather nice. Well, can be nice.
Yeah.
I've had quite vivid dreams during this time.
Right. That's funny, isn't it? I think that's quite common. It took me about a month to stop having the panic dream of leaving my viola on a train.
Oh.
I don't know if you ever have those.
Oh yes, I've had those. No, normally when I have those when I'm on tour, actually. Right. So that's amazing that you've had those when you've been at home.
Yeah, I know, it did take a few weeks for them to go. Ridiculous. You've had lots of silver linings during this lockdown period, and I've seen that on Instagram there's been lots of cuddle time with Fizzy the cat, which must be lovely.
very lucky to have pets during this time. I mean, I really feel sorry for those who don't, and also a garden and the whole thing about, you know, a lot of people were saying, why is it happening now in spring and summer? But actually for me, it's been a blessing just to watch the development of spring, and I've got a vegetable patch, me doing gardening. I mean, incredible. You know, I've been learning a lot. And of course I stuck it all into one fairly small little patch, and now it's exploded. It's completely overgrown.
That's fantastic. That's so nice that you're able to be at home to see all of that happen. It's wonderful.
Yes, and then going on the kind of regular walks every day with our dog Robbie, and just because you're going the same way every day, and you really get to know the trees and their path through life and through the seasons. It's amazing. Every day it looks slightly different. I mean, I know this is very obvious to most people, but not to me, because or to other musicians, you know, because we're not consistently in one place for very long. You know, you might get the luxury of doing that for a week or so, and you think, oh gosh, actually this is really quite interesting, you know, seeing the same thing every day for a week. But to do that for 3 months, that's a really different experience. So I value that. You know, I'm very grateful for all of that. Yeah, next to all the kind of the down feeling, and of course there's always, you know, you have to have downs to have ups, and so you have to take the good with the bad, really, the bad with the good.
Very lovely, thank you. So the violin has obviously formed a big part of your lockdown activity, and I'm curious actually, how did you end up playing the violin? Did you choose it when you were young, or how did you find it?
Okay, so well, I think the first thing I did of any kind of musical activity, I guess, was singing with Mum. We always sang on journeys in the car, that kind of thing. Both parents are very, very musical, both singers, not professionally, but they did sing for John Eliot Gardner, actually, when he wasn't this in the Monteverdi choir, when it was kind of semi-amateur, semi-professional in the 70s. And they took Julie, my brother, and I along to concerts. So I remember listening to Handel oratorios and doing my word searches at the same time, things like that. Things that you do when you're, you know, 6 and 7 or whatever, and just kind of taking a lot of that in. So we did a lot of singing as a family. Mum, well, both parents, they play lots of different instruments. Mum often would get her guitar out, and we'd be singing rounds, and she's German, so there were it was mostly kind of German folk songs, which I would then later on kind of recognize in Schubert Lieder and Brahms Lieder, and think, oh yeah. So there's a lovely thread there. And we'd also sing in church. My father's a priest, so we sang a lot of Choralsätze, you know, kind of choir stuff in church, developed our singing that way. And actually I did more singing than playing at first, and everyone thought that I was going to be a singer. I sang in my father's choir wherever we lived, in Germany or in England. He always set up a choir. In Germany it was called the William Byrd Singers, and it kind of it did really well, actually. I think it was quite alien to people there, because they were into their more romantic repertoire, excuse me, like you know, Brahms, and of course lots and lots of Bach, and lots of Baroque music. But Dad kind of wanted to bring his experience that he'd had as a choral scholar, because he was at King's as a boy, and then later on choral scholar. He had all of that wealth of knowledge of English polyphony and cathedral music. He wanted to kind of bring that to audiences there, really. So he set up this choir, and so for me it was amazingly beneficial, because I got to know all of this repertoire. So whereas other string players kind of grew up with, you know, listening to maybe to string quartets or violin concertos, I was more kind of in tune with William Byrd masses,
Right.
and Tompkins and Tallis and Isaac and Monteverdi, of course, and then also the later stuff, Stanford and Vaughan Williams and Elgar and love all that stuff. So that was, yes, I did a lot, and then kind of by the way, I played the violin as well. Right. It's kind of like that, and then that kind of took over. I guess I did choose the violin. There was a moment that I recall quite vividly of watching Blue Peter when I was probably really young, but so that was one program that we were allowed to watch. John Noakes, so that dates me. That's a long time ago. Love John Noakes with his dog. I can't remember, what was the name of the dog? Do you remember? No, you're a bit younger than me. You might not.
Sorry, I
anyway,
don't know.
If I can't do it, anyway, I loved his dog, sheepdog. Anyway, and I remember this group of Japanese kids came on the show, and they played the Bach double, and they walked around. There were about 20 of them, or maybe more. And apparently I was like, you know, transfixed watching. Wow. Couldn't eat my tea. my egg and soldiers. I was just completely transfixed. And I said to Mum, I said, you know, I must have been about 2 or 3. I don't know how old I was. So that made a very big impact on me. So after that, it was like, you know, violin. Whenever there was a violin playing in a concert or on the radio, I would always perk up. And so that seemed to be the instrument for me. I just liked the sound. And a friend of my parents from Greece actually lived around the corner, violin teacher. And I remember the day when Dad brought in 2 little violin cases, because Julian and I started at the same time. And it was in the summer, I think. I just remember being in the garden. And he came round the side of the house. I just remember it just like it happened yesterday. And with these 2 little cases, you know, those old kind of cardboardy kind of type of cases that end up peeling back, you know, yes. And with the terrible handles that come off. One of them. I remember opening it up, getting it out. I didn't even tighten the bow, and I just played whatever, loads of barrelage, I think. Really good, you know, bow hold. So I was very enthusiastic, and I loved it. And Julian and I would go to lessons together, and we learnt Suzuki method, so very much kind of by ear. And I also recall wonderful occasions of him getting all of his pupils together, you know, all standards. And so the little ones, so everyone would stand in a circle, and the better ones would be in the middle. And they were normally older, so it kind of looked a bit like that, you know, like a kind of circular pyramid. And the little ones were right on the side. And so everyone would play all of the pieces right from the beginning to the books. And then if you didn't know the piece, you just sit down. So it was so fun. And you got really excited that you could go a little bit inwards, you know, each time, because you knew another piece and join in the next piece. And so the ones left over at the end would play the Bach double, because that's the last piece in the book. And I didn't get to that at that point, because we moved away, because we moved to Germany when I was 8, and we actually moved away from that teacher before then. So but that was my kind of first experience of playing with others all together. Yeah, just soul food, really. It was just wonderful, you know. It gave so much joy even at that age. Yeah.
Well, I suppose then later on, when you moved into historical performance, I guess having had that early knowledge of, well, I suppose medieval and Baroque musical language, was that a factor then in your move into historical performance?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it felt very natural. It didn't feel like, oh, I'm going to decide to go into historical performance. It was always part of my life somehow. I mean, we knew people who had a gamba consort in Kassel. We lived in the town of Kassel in Germany, and before we moved there, I went to Rudolf Steiner school there in Kassel, which is a very kind of artistic, very musical school. I had wonderful experiences there. I mean, I had the most incredible childhood, actually, if you come to think of it. I felt very well, it felt normal, of course, like for any child, but looking back on it, it was pretty, I was exposed to lots of different things at the same time, lots of different repertoire, which was amazing, if you think about it. Yeah. But we had access to, there'd always be something going on. There'd always be, every Sunday there'd be something, or and during, you know, because of the services. So I'd either try out a piece that I knew in the service from the gallery. So it was quite nice, because you were kind of hidden. So it wasn't like a performance. So you kind of got used to playing in public, but it wasn't really, you know, and over coffee after with the congregation, then people would say, oh, that's nice this week. What are you going to do next week? You know, it was kind of very casual. So there was never this kind of thing of, oh gosh, I've got to prepare for weeks and months and months, and then I've got to do a concert, you know, and becoming such a kind of dramatically eventful thing in your life. It was very much in the flow of living. And that in Germany, I mean, music in schools is a big deal, and I think still is. I hope it hasn't gone down the drain like it has here. I'm actually not quite sure about that. But especially the Steiner school, but even the school before, because I went there when I was 10, but even at the Grundschule, the primary school where I was at, you would just start the day with a folk song. That's how it worked. And maybe a poem or a thought. And this was very much the teacher's initiative, but it wasn't, I don't think it was particularly part of the curriculum, but it was just part of teaching, of culture. So everyone was very familiar with just singing together and kind of moving together with words and with rhythm, and you could tell, you know, even with the more unmusical kids, they really benefited from that, of course, as we know. Sorry, but I've gone off on a tangent. Yeah, exposed to lots of different things. So there was quite a lot of early music going on in pockets. Yeah. This is now kind of 80s. And I was, of course, very much then actually, so in my teens, I changed violin teachers, and I had a violin teacher from Riga, and he knew Gidon Kramer, and so he was very influenced by that kind of Russian school. And so he basically kind of took me and said, right, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do Wieniawski, we're going to do and Shashik and everything, and you're going to do competitions, and I was like, oh, okay. And so that became just another strand in what I did, really. And so I started practicing, and Julian was hilarious about this, because we made a lot of music at home, either preparing for something, or you know, there's always some kind of choir rehearsal going on, or something. He would so I remember once learning the Spohr concerto, I think it was D minor, yeah, with kind of slides in it and stuff, and I was really into it. Partly it felt like an emancipation, because it was very different from what anyone else was doing at home. Of course, very important when you're a teenager. Find your groove. So Julian, he was just kind of teasing me the way big brothers do. So I'll never forget him getting his guitar and playing along, playing kind of folky, jammy, bluesy chords to the Spohr. I mean, it doesn't sound very funny now, but at the time, because I was so engrossed and taking myself so seriously, I was like proper violinist, you know, vibrato, just the whole thing going, motorway stroke, you know, there I was in my own world. And then I suddenly heard this kind of strumming outside, which it was just very, very funny. So of course, at the time, I was very annoyed. And another time, he would tease me. He would, you know, he'd come into my room and he'd take my bow away and stuff.
That's so mean.
Very mean. Or he'd start. Sometimes he also started. I mean, he's got the most incredible imagination, really. Especially when it came to teasing. He'd probably kill me with this. But he would sometimes also stand right outside, so I wouldn't hear him coming up because I was so engrossed in practice, and he would sing just a semitone above what I was playing. And just kind of wait till I actually heard it. It took a while sometimes.
Wow, that's really harsh.
It's quite harsh, but quite inventive.
Yeah. Yes. I suppose it takes quite a lot to stick to a semitone out from something, actually.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then later on, we kind of grew up and were a little bit more mature. We actually spent quite a lot of time together just playing through stuff. So he was pretty good on the piano. He did organ for a while. A very kind of broad musician in the best sense, kind of like someone from the 18th century, actually, come to think of it. He was just good at everything. He could play anything. I also obviously played violin, viola. Mum had a cello, because obviously mum played the cello, but he would sometimes pick that up. You know, he was just one of those people who could do anything. And so, and because we did so much singing, sometimes he'd just kind of find something, sort of pre-internet, so just stuff we had on the shelf or in the church library or somewhere, and say, go right, sing this. And so I'd try it and he'd play it, and just things like that. And then we started putting things on at school in Kassel, and Julian started doing some conducting. So I was leading, this is all on modern instruments. I was leading things like, he put on amazing things like Handel's Solomon. He just kind of got friends together to be in the choir, organized the whole thing. We got a band together, we did the rehearsals. I mean, we were all about kind of 14, 15, 16, 17 maybe. And we did other things. He conducted the Greensleeves variations, Vaughan Williams. But we didn't have a harp, so we got someone to play it on the piano. Just stuff, you know, just kind of making do with what we had. But we were very lucky at the school that we were, the Steiner School, because there was a grand piano there, and that, you know, there were facilities, and we played in the orchestra anyway. That everything was there. You had the infrastructure to put on something like that, and the support of the teacher as well.
So from what you're saying, it sounds as though a creative career was an inevitability to an extent.
Yes, it kind of was. It kind of, I didn't really decide. It just kind of, a lot of things just kind of happened, really.
So did you have an idea of going into anything that wasn't music? Or, I mean, it sounds like you were kind of just swept along by all of
I was a bit swept along. No, I was very interested in literature. I had a fantastic German teacher. So this is in Germany, in Kassel, and the A-levels I took were English and German, which was actually a little bit ambitious, I guess, kind of being kind of half and half, and not really, you know, but kind of one foot in both cultures, and each, never really 2 feet in one. That's how it felt at the time. And my German was good, I think, and fluent. Now it's a little bit patchy because I mean I speak it, but sometimes you know, the vocab is a little bit rusty. But then it was, I mean, people thought I'd grown up in Germany. I was just kind of normal kind of Deutsch person. So I had a wonderful teacher in German, and we did lots and lots of different kinds of literature. And I just felt I could kind of relate to it, and I loved writing, and just it kind of brought out different things in me. You know, there's this kind of more introvert side that we all have. We're all a mix of all sorts, aren't we? Whereas when I was playing, I was kind of more extrovert, because I was always in a kind of somehow in a leading capacity, even then at school, because I was slightly, well, they just use the ones that can do that, don't they? And then of course those qualities are then fostered. And so I was asked to take sectionals and stuff like that. So I learned how to do that just by having to do it. You know, I didn't study it or anything. It just kind of happened because I was asked to do it. So given lots of opportunities. So that kind of brought out the extrovert side of me, and the language, and that kind of study was also, I realized, very important. So I did for a while. When I was 16, I was thinking, oh, I could maybe do something to do with maybe more thinking. like doing some kind of literature course, or I mean, I was never really heavily into science or anything like that. So that yes, if it hadn't been music, but then I of course realized that I'd been spending a lot of time doing a lot of reading and a lot of writing a lot of essays, and realized that I probably wouldn't have much time to practice and to make music, and realized actually that's kind of what I needed to do. And just carry on the life I already had. I remember counting up the concerts I had, because I was also in 3 choirs when I was in Kassel. So always my dad's choir, which was kind of, it didn't really count as a choir because it was just extended family supper, you know, it's just kind of what you did. So that was just that. And but we did a lot of concerts, and I remember actually singing the solo part in the Allegri Miserere when I was 16, getting those top C's, hitting those top C's. I know I couldn't do that now. And I remember my mum, who was very good, still is a very good singing teacher, warming up with me in the antechapel. Of course, everyone could hear. It was a blimmin' nightmare. But she did these really funny exercises. They're kind of kind of getting the voice, probably wrong, but getting the voice kind of into the head. And she was so good at getting me to do that, that it was just, I had no worries. Concert, ding, you know, it comes 5 times each time. Boo! And it was exhilarating. And of course, we were singing from a gallery right at, you know, the back of the church. So people, if they wanted to watch us, they would have to do that. And I love the fact that they didn't. They were just kind of looking forward. So very, very much in the tradition of kind of singing for the glory of God, really, you know, in the church atmosphere. That's always what we've done, and it goes, of course, along with what Bach did, you know, in Thomaskirche. And talking about that, I also sang in a Lutheran church choir. So we sang lots and lots of Bach cantate church services on Sunday mornings. That was in a different part of town in Kassel. So we'd always cycle there. So I remember turning up to the rehearsals at the last bit is you have to go up a hill. And especially in the summer, you'd turn up slightly kind of red-faced. So you could always tell who was getting into the warm-up exercises last minute, because people had kind of red cheeks. It was always me. And so got to know lots of Bach cantatas on Sunday mornings. We always had a Wednesday evening rehearsal. And so it was a proper kind of church choir with an amazing conductor who's still around. He's in his 90s now, I'm guessing. He wrote a book on Bach, and we studied the B minor Mass. And so I learned it from a singer point of view. And then later on, of course, played it. But that's how I learned most of Bach, always from a singer point of view. And it's helped me a lot, actually, in my way of just hearing the music, appreciating the text, seeing the whole thing from a rhetorical point of view. I would really recommend that as a kind of way of getting to know Lutheran church music, especially Bach, but any of it really. Sing it first.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a couple of questions that I'll come back to later that tie in a little bit to what we've just been talking about. I'd like to move on actually to talking about your violin now, and your bow. Actually, we shouldn't forget about bow, and also what kind of strings you use. I'm curious to know.
Okay, so my violin, it's right here. It's a so it's a Pezzarini, and I absolutely adore it. Very beautiful back. It's got kind of this thing, of course, that's a bit of wear and tear, and it's got a so-called Baroque neck. It's got quite a long fingerboard, so that I can do kind of classical stuff on it. So Baroque, I mean, not that anything was standardized, as we know, there are lots of different shapes and sizes, and but a Baroque one, I guess, around the time would have been a little bit shorter, like a shorter fringe, you know, that kind of feel. Well, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, how it works as set up for an instrument. Of course, there are certain kind of rules and I was going to say rules and regulations, health and safety that you need to have on an instrument, of course. But then again, every instrument is different and has its own dynamic within its physical structure and how it works and what makes the best sound. So I've actually, in keeping with that, I've got a fairly high bridge actually on this, just because a flatter bridge doesn't get as much resonance. I mean, that's always something that you can keep experimenting with, isn't it? I know a lot of fellow violinists who tinker with that themselves and who are much more knowledgeable than I am about those kind of things. But I absolutely adore it. It's got quite a rich kind of sound. I found it in its modern condition, meaning so it's from 1739. Wow. From Genoa. We don't know much about the maker at all, Pezzarini. A few searches have been made by various people, and there is an account of him in Genoa, but there isn't much about him, and we don't know another instrument by him. So I'm just wondering, you know, I have my kind of fantasy thought that maybe it was, you know, Galliano or someone else who just made another instrument with a different name, or possibly not. But it's, in a way, the name is actually, it's not particularly important to me, to be honest. It's the sound, isn't it? How it speaks, whether it's possible for you to make your voice heard, and what you have to say with the music. That's very, very much the most important thing in the instrument, I would say. So when students come to me and say, and they're trying out an instrument and they want to have feedback, you know, I kind of listen to the instrument, and then you hear them, and then you just, sometimes it's really interesting and very important to separate the two. Sometimes it's impossible, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, you might hear someone and they sound pretty much the same on every instrument. Interesting. And then the opposite happens too. And then you can immediately tell, someone picks up an instrument, you can just tell that they relate or not.
I used to do that when I was a violin teacher. Actually, occasionally I'd try people on a viola, and that was really interesting, that suddenly you might give somebody a viola and go, oh my goodness, you're a viola player, who knew? We've just some instruments, even within different violins, you can find an instrument just takes with somebody in a different way.
Yes, and I used to love, I haven't done it for ages now, but when I was looking for an instrument, it took me about 6 years to find this one, because I'd been asked to record the Bach sonatas and partitas. And at the time, I had a really beautiful violin, which now lives in Australia, because I sold it to someone who moved to Australia. It was a Roland Ross copy of a Strat, which I bought off Pavlo Besnoziuk back in, oh goodness, I think I was still studying actually, so early 90s. And he had one too. And I was doing, at that time, I was still at college, and I was doing a lot of work with him, with New London Concert with Philip Pickett, and then other things with Pavlo. Was very, very kind to me, gave me lots and lots of stuff in those days, and I learned so much from him actually. And I bought his violin, which was great, and it was so cheap. Yeah, I think it's a special rate for me, and it's beautiful, very very different in colour, very orange. And I recorded the first couple of Palladian discs with the Palladian Ensemble, which was my kind of one of the first groups that I played with and recorded with. And we won this early music network competition back in the day, where you got a whole tour of Britain, which is amazing. You got to go to all sorts of places that you'd only seen on the map, and also to Scotland. I remember playing in Edinburgh and Perth as well. Wow. And then we also had a tour of Holland we got out of that prize as well. And then later on, slightly going off on a tangent, we had the program called Rising Stars. So we were one of them. That was all sorts of different groups. So we ended up going around Europe. Anyway, but that was then on this violin. But I did use that Roland Ross for a few recordings, but I did feel, I mean, it was very suited to very kind of fiddly stuff. It was a very soprano orientated kind of instrument. Right. And it was great for doing divisions and lots of fast ornamentation and kind of more, somehow I related to it as a kind of 17th century instrument. And I was playing a lot of that stuff during that time. And then when they asked me to do Bach, I thought, oh gosh, right, I think I need to find an old instrument. Yeah. And so I went searching, and literally wherever I was on tour, and there was a lot of touring in the 90s, as you know, it was all happening. So I might have been in Holland or in Germany or in France or Spain, wherever, and also in Australia. And everyone else went to the pub, and I went to the violin dealers and the violin makers. And sometimes some friends came along, and I learned so much. Oh my goodness, it was just fantastic, because most of them are very generous. You know, they want to sell their instruments, don't they? So they would lay out about 10 instruments, mostly in modern condition. So some of them in more kind of niche areas like Utrecht or you know, Basel or somewhere. They'd have their kind of Baroque instruments. And that was always very, very interesting. So I developed a kind of method. So I'd not look at any labels, or I'd just kind of take in what it looked like, but I'd play each one, just literally just the open strings, and put it back down and just assess what my initial reaction was. And then I'd go down to 5. If there were 10, I'd go down to 5, and then look at them and then play a bit longer, and then kind of work my way through. And what was really interesting, the one that I then kind of picked at the end to be the one that I related to most, I'd play on that and would, you know, get a bit carried away, put it down, and then I'd try one of the other ones, and then I was back to square one because it sounded great. And I was thinking, oh God. So that was a bit of a learning journey in lots of different levels. How do you respond to an instrument? How do you listen to it? What are you actually listening for? Are you listening inside your head? Are you actually listening to what's coming out? How does your perception change when you've put it down? And then you pick up the next one. It's so subjective. You're still relating to what you just heard. And then you hear the next one, and it might be very much in contrast, but at the same time, you're carrying something else from the one you've played before. So it's probably too complex. It's probably really straightforward. You just pick up the one that you like. I'm probably overcomplicating it, but that was my experience at the time. So when I found this one, it was actually back at home, and because I was living in London at the time, and at Bridgewood and Knightsett, and I'd been pestering them, you know, all the time. What have you got in? Anything that I might like? And knew them very well, and they rang. Actually, it was in the time of answering machines at home, no mobile phones. So I remember coming back from a tour or something, and there was a message saying, oh, I think we've got something in that you might like. And it was this one. So I went in the next day and literally just played a few notes and thought, right, yeah, that's it. And I'm sure I wouldn't have felt that if I hadn't had that experience of getting to know all those other violins, all those other instruments.
So was it the same experience with the bow?
The bow was a slightly different thing. So I'd had a lovely, my first Baroque bow was by Brian Tunnicliffe. Richard Tunnicliffe is the cellist. And it was a fairly heavier bow than this one anyway. It was slightly thicker and very fluted. And I got on with that really well, actually, and liked it, but realized that I couldn't be as light as I wanted to be, and I couldn't go into the string as much as I wanted to. But that might well have been to do with my ability to do that, and also the instrument I was playing. I then had just tried out lots of different bows from fellow players, actually, and got to know these bows by René Groppe, who sadly passed away a few years ago, but his brother has taken over the workshop in Metz in France, and Mathieu. Anyway, and just fell in love with the feel of these bows, and had a few conversations with him on the phone. Very, very low, raspy voice, definitely a smoker, probably a bit of the old that as well. And as he told me later on, but he was a Rachel. It's not very great, you sound. You pick up a bow and you know it's alive. And I was like, right, okay. So it was a little bit like Harry Potter, the wand thing.
Oh, this is the wizard. Yeah,
exactly. Yes. So he sent me a bow, and he said, if it's a good bow, it'll teach you how to play. First of all, pick it up, see if it does something in your hand. It did, of course, and it did teach me how to play. At first, I thought it was way too light, and I did call him and say, I'm not sure whether I can actually do this. I don't know what to make of this bow. And he did say, give it 2 weeks and see what it tells you. So brilliant advice, isn't it? You know, listen to the bow. Don't just inflict yourself on it. See what it can tell you. And what it taught me was slow bow, and how to get into the string, and this whole idea of the string being something that has depth, and you can play at any point, at the top, the middle, the bottom. And this bow really, really did that for me. So I got 3 more.
As you do.
So I got a little one, which 17th century one, and then I got a kind of early classical, and then a late classical.
Wow.
As well.
Fantastic. So actually, that ties in very nicely with one of the questions that we were sent in online. So somebody has said, I started playing the Baroque violin a year ago, but I still play with a shoulder rest. How did you start playing without a shoulder rest and chin rest?
Yes, that's a very good point. It's not easy, especially when you're so used to being so secure in your positioning here. I think what I would say, excuse me, I think what I would recommend would be to scale it down gradually, because if that's the only way you know how to play, if that's what you associate with playing the violin, then changing it very radically might just make you feel very insecure, make you feel like you're about to lose it, drop it. So it's quite good to just, well, take your shoulder rest off first, keep your chin rest on, and just have a little pad there. You know, you can get those kind of pads that you know that you clean the cars with, you know, that have got leather bound ones, and there's a name for those. One of them, they can be really thick actually. You could just cut it down to half, and then when that feels okay, then you take the chin rest away. And of course it's not just about taking things away, it's also about adjusting the actual position. So if you're a modern player and you're used to playing on this, obviously on this side with the chin rest, and that means that the violin is going to come out to the side of your body much more, and so this arm is going to be more like that, isn't it, in front of you. Now, before the chin rest going onto this side, just happened in kind of 19th century time, they did have a little chin rest that was kind of in the middle, just above the tailpiece, which a lot of people play early 19th century music with now, and even classical and earlier, I think, too. And of course, like with all these things, because there were so many experiments being made all the time, and so that it wasn't like a standard thing, like, you know, in the 1760s, okay, we've just had a change of year, so now we are going to use these kind of strings, or we're going to use this kind of bow. You know, it was a kind of fluid thing that just kind of happened, and kind of went up and down in terms of development. But there was something that you could then hold on to, especially when technique changed and there was more kind of acrobatics going on in the left hand with shifting. They obviously realized, oh, actually I need to hold on to something. So you could get yourself one of those middle thingies. They're often quite small. They're not like, it's not one of those where your whole chin fits in. It's often just a little, but it just gives you a little grip. And what happens then, if you have one of those, or if you have nothing there, what happens is that your violin then naturally comes a little bit more towards the center of you, rather than being out there. And I love the idea that the instrument is very much part of the body, very much an extension of you, really. And I see the bow exactly the same way, that the bow is an extension of your arm. That's why it's really important to hold on to it and to be very flexible in your bowing arm. So I would do it bit by bit, just kind of scaling the scaffolding, as it were, down, and revisiting how you hold it, and just trying out different positions, and it will feel very, very odd. I mean, what I did, I suppose, at the beginning, because I guess I was playing so much Baroque music already on my modern violin with whatever I had, and with my modern violin I was dabbling with shoulder rest, without shoulder rest, you know, going from teacher to teacher. I had lots of teachers growing up, and often had to start again with different techniques, which was very annoying at the time, but actually it's done me in good stead for teaching later on. So I also tried out lots of different chin rests. I remember there was loads and loads of sessions about all of that, and trying different ones. So I was quite used to kind of dabbling and trying and being quite flexible. So it wasn't such a big deal for me to not have one, because I'd actually tried it anyway. I'd also come in contact with some Baroque violinists from the Hamburger Baroque Orchestra when this is the third choir I was in, which I didn't tell you earlier, which was called Junger Chorkassel, and the director, Klaus Ulrich, he was very much into HE, and he was like the first person who mentioned authenticity, and I was like, what? You know, well, everyone was, and that the whole idea of it being a thing, actually, And very soon after that, or probably around the same time, I started listening to Musikantiker Köln CDs because they were very big in Germany, of course, at the time. Anyway, and so he was really into the stylistic stuff, and we were doing I was in the choir, in his choir, and we were doing the Christus Oratorio, and he got the Hamburger Baroque Orchestra to come along. And so for the first time, I saw these Baroque violinists without any scaffolding. I was like, whoa. Anyway, luckily 2 of them came to stay with us because it was a kind of, we were hosting them. So of course, you know, battering with questions. In the end, we started playing together and they gave me a lesson. So that was my kind of first experience. And I remember him saying, just relax your shoulders, make sure that they are kind of like a clothes hanger, which is good for any violin playing or viola playing, wouldn't you say? Stick that on there, just kind of quite naturally, without any preconceived kind of associations. That's pretty tricky, but just put yourself in that frame of mind that you've never ever seen this thing before. It just happens to be there, it's part of you. And there you go. So it's actually a very, very natural thing. And what you find if you put it there, okay, there's a gap here, of course, which you can fill up if you like. You're going to actually influence the amount of resonance you get from there a little bit, but you can fill that up if you need a bit more security. But over time, you feel that actually feels okay. Obviously, you know, especially in the summer, I would use a little protection, like a chamois leather, which I not normally have. And I also sometimes have a little bit of, you know, that stuff, that carpet underlay stuff, kind of plasticky. Yes. Not non-slip for carpets. I sometimes put that under here because just to get away from the kind of collarbone-y, kind of noisy stuff that you get, that kind of flapping. So I find that very, very comfortable. And at the beginning, when I was studying, so I was studying modern violin and doing all the modern repertoire and everything. And I decided, because I was very keen on Baroque violin, but I wasn't really allowed to do it at the time because I was in my first year. But I was doing it in secret. So I decided, because I encountered these difficulties of doing both at the same time, and I realized that I would get into some kind of Baroque string sound, gut string sound, work out how to actually make a good sound getting into the string, go back to modern, and it sounded like, you know, just, well, it sounded very puny and just not full like it had been the day before I played the Baroque violin. I thought, well, this won't do. So in my head, I basically did a kind of separation. I just divided the two. So, right, this is my modern violin. This is a completely different instrument. I am a different person. I have a different mentality. And I was quite nerdy. Sometimes I used to wear different clothes, even, can you believe it? And then I'd go and practice my Baroque violin and I'd wear something different. It was just to help me sort it out in my head. And I would then think, okay, so this is a completely different attitude to this instrument. And then I'd try and play down here like Mateus used to, on the collarbone, like you see in all the paintings, the iconography, and I'd kind of try out the Innegal thing that is really brilliant to do when you're down here, because it just kind of happens quite naturally, that you don't have equal notes that you learn, of course, to do with your modern bow, to have equally sustained. And yeah, it actually helped it to separate the two very, very much, but for me. So it's not for everyone, and it was very much kind of my way of doing it. And I mean, these days, because in institutions, I mean, the modern teachers are much more open to playing Baroque instruments and learning how to do that, and much more accepting of the fact that it's actually a thing, because it's mainstream now, and people can earn money, well, in normal times, and that it's also, it actually benefits the modern playing. And I mean, I do quite a lot of stuff at the Juilliard, and even that, I mean, I think Perlman is actually still very reserved about the idea of Baroque instruments. I've never spoken to him, but I've seen him in the lift, in the elevator, and I kind of hid because I didn't quite know what he would make of a live Baroque violinist. The shame of it all. I don't know whether you remember, but he did write, well, he said some things in an interview, I mean, it's years ago. Anyway, not going to go into that. But yes, so most of the modern teachers there are actually very, very open-minded and just want to learn from it. And like you see with kind of modern symphony orchestras now too, they actually want to revisit the old repertoire and play Handel, Concerti Grossi and Bach suites and everything else, you know, and why shouldn't they? Absolutely. You know, and yes, that's right. For so long they felt like they couldn't because it belonged to the authentic people.
Yes, well, actually, this again, there's a question that came in that's relevant to this. So many modern string players will start on a Baroque instrument with metal strings because that's what they're used to. What would you suggest for people thinking about trying gut? What's a good way in?
Is this people who are still at school or kind of
how? I'm thinking probably after school, so I guess in the 18 to 25 bracket, might be thinking of trying gut strings for the first time.
Okay.
Is there a particular brand that you'd suggest they go for? Is there a particular way of approaching the gut?
Yes, definitely. So it's probably best to put a gutty on first of all, and just to see how different that feels. Don't go putting all three, you know, A and D as well, because that's what I have. I mean, others might have a gut G as well, but I've got a wound G, and then I've got pure gut, so not wound. That means, and of course they're porous and very sensitive. The D is the thickest, and then the A and E also got, of course. So you start out with just putting one string on and just see how it feels. You might actually find that you like it, because it means that you can. It's more elastic in a way. It has a very different feel to the steel string, of course. And you might find that you can actually go into the string and that you can express very much with the right hand, much more, of course, than you would if you have a wound string. And of course, that is key to anything to do with style, because it's all about shapes in the phrases, in the individual notes, the inequality between the down and the up bow. All of those things you can do only really well do them better with a string that gives.
Thank you.
So start with one, and then if that feels good, then put on an A, and then you're halfway there. Well, a third way there.
Yes, true. Thank you. We've only got a few minutes left. I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple of questions. Let's see how we go.
Sorry, I've been rabbiting on about all sorts of things.
No, it's wonderful. Thank you. So the first one, have you been teaching over Zoom at all? And are there tips or tricks that you'd recommend to string teachers using it?
Yes, I've done a lot of Zoom teaching. Not so much kids, because that's not really what I'm doing, but you know, conservatoire level, and also a lot of one-offs. At first, people, of course, I knew, so my regular students, and that seemed fine, because you have a relationship already, and you know them, and you just kind of take off what, you know, where you left, and that's okay. I mean, you have to get used to a certain few things, like a list of practical things. So I always make sure that I've got the music already. So either you have to split your screen and have it, you know, from IMSLP or from your files on the screen, so you have the person in the other part, or you have your music stand next to you, or if you're very high, you know, whizzy and technologically savvy, you might have another monitor. I mean, I've got my laptop. Some of my colleagues, they actually do it on FaceTime, and so they use their phone even, and then have and the sound apparently is fine, and then they just look at the music on their laptop or their computer. I do advise having a microphone. This is my microphone. It's not particularly expensive, this one. I just got it on Amazon at the beginning of lockdown. It cost me about £70 or so, and I plugged that one in, and that seems to improve the sound. I do find that teaching is better on Skype than on Zoom for some reason, but it really depends on the internet connection, the individual internet connection. So it sounds so dull, but it just is. It really does. So I was teaching someone on the West Coast in America, and we just kept cutting out, and it was actually hilarious. And luckily it was kind of someone I knew. It'd be fine if you didn't know them as well, because we're all in it together, aren't we? but it kept cutting out, and then it was not synced, you know, so I heard the sound first, and then I saw it, and I kept saying, why is he doing an up bow on that? What? So that was very funny. And other teachers have preferred viewing videos that they've done before, that the student has videoed themselves, sent that, and then the lesson is really viewing that together and then discussing it and then trying some bits. That's also a very good way of doing it. I've done that a couple of times. But my advice about how you behave, just be yourself. Don't try and be, I mean, in all, anyway, always, but of course, but sometimes when you're in a new situation, it's a little bit strange, isn't it? And you've got this kind of screen and you can't tell what the feedback is. You're not in the same room. You can't hear them breathe. It's odd. It's really odd. So you just have to try and be yourself, like I'm trying to be with you now.
Thank you. And then the last question for today, it's another one that came in from online. Somebody had said, what 3 things could audiences be doing to support musicians at this time? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Oh gosh, it's such a big subject, isn't it?
It is.
And of course we're all in dire straits. I mean, just this morning I was reading another article about a theatre, I think Plymouth. That's kind of redundancies, and it just it's just appalling, and the heart goes out. And okay, well, I think some lobbying can be done. I mean, you're very, very experienced in that, might I say, and you're a bit of an inspiration in that field. You've done amazing things for trying to get Brexit undone.
Well, one does one's best.
Yeah, I know, indeed. Yes, we can only do our best. But I think lobbying MPs is always good. I mean, I know it sounds really dull, but I think it does make a difference. And labouring the point that artists in all forms, so it's not just, I mean, musicians are a very small part of it, actually. You know, there's the whole industry. We've got visual arts, we've got the pop industry, and we've got theatre, all those small theatres around the country that are vital. Just for people. It's not just about cinemas and Netflix, and which are huge anyway, but you know, it's the entertainment goes far beyond those things, and I think people tend to forget about that, who aren't particularly concert goers or theatre goers. And maybe this is also a good opportunity to alert them to this amazing rich culture that we have and have had, and to make use of it. So again, to go with the Stoics, to try and take this difficult situation and see it as an opportunity, and to really lobby Oliver Dowden, you know, the culture secretary. I know he did an announcement the other day, but I think it was more about football than anything else.
That's the problem.
Which is fine. Nothing against football. But yes. So those are the things to do. Support artists that you know by, you know, paying for, you know, if they're doing recitals online. I think that the way to go now is to actually, there's a paywall set up, and then you can watch and support. That seems to be the trend. I know I'm doing a few of them coming up. And what else? I think sending messages of support, it's always good.
It helps, doesn't it? Yeah, it
helps. It's always lovely. I've had some lovely messages from people, from fans and people who come to my festival in Brecon, just kind of asking what's happening, how you doing, and you know, it must be weird, and just things like that. So it's lovely to know that there is concern out there.
Yeah, agreed. Rachel, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. And I look forward to seeing you in 2022. Hopefully our paths will cross before then. But
I sincerely hope so. Absolutely. Yes, I hope so. When you're over this way, or
yes.
If I doubt I'll be coming over to Ireland before then, but you never know. Yes, thank you very much.
All right.